So, let me begin this story with immediately saying how I was an idiot at the time. Drug-addicted, alcoholic, riddled with anxiety. I had just attempted a suicide due to something very traumatic. I was abruptly taken off my benzodiazepines because of it for some time and even experienced a seizure, so I was most definitely at my rock bottom. Due to this, I didn't have the best judgment, nor was I exactly a super good judge of character. I started hanging out with a very nasty crowd. Grunge, punk rock, loved to party, never had their own cash. Very destructive, impulsive, you get the drill. An ex-friend of mine, we'll call him Sideshow Bob, started hanging out with me quite a bit more and more as the weeks passed by. Now Bob worked as a pizza delivery driver. He never, and I mean never, washed his clothes, to which he owned maybe 3 outfits, including his work uniform, and only women's clothes. The women's clothes he wore to be punky. I saw no shame in that. I even thought it was a little cool how he didn't care what others thought about it, but that means he also liked my clothes. So, like a little sister might do, he constantly was stealing my clothes. Keep in mind, he also barely showered. Often, if he even woke up before 5 p.m. in time for work, he'd jump off my couch, take a pack of cigarettes without asking, and speed off. Within the 4-month period he stayed in my home, I literally saw him go to take a shower about 5 times. His feet. Those feet were the worst I've ever smelled. Long after the situation was dealt with even, he was gone, and my carpet had still completely absorbed that terrible scent. I tried everything to remove it, but alas, I left that home with his stench embedded into it. And he paid nothing, not a single bill. Never contributed to the groceries, cleaning, nothing. Nor was he on my lease. Yet he established residency in my home legally. It didn't bother me so much at the time. As I said, I was at my rock bottom and was basically just happy to have someone to shit show with me. I just considered him a very goofy, annoying, and kind of stinky best friend. Until eventually, that wasn't enough for him. You see, at some point, he began to become completely obsessed with me. Very quickly, he went from basically having everything he needed in life for free while he kept any money or tips he made, but decided on his own accord that we were meant to be together. Things got pretty awkward and cringe from there. If I'd return home from work, friend's house, etc., he'd cry and follow me room to room over and over, asking repeatedly why we couldn't just be together. We were best friends already after all. We should just date. I was not attracted to him though and was going through a hard divorce at the time. I didn't want to ruin our friendship. It got to the point where I avoided even going home. Instead, I'd stay with my mother or friends because he'd just cry and follow me around, desperately trying to convince me to be with him. I'd almost often find him in my bed at this point. He'd even quit his job to have a better chance of seeing me. I told him if this continued, I would no longer be able to allow him to crash there. Well, at one point after avoiding him for a few days, Sideshow Bob really started to come out of his shell. He cornered me, screaming, "I'm sick and tired of being rejected by you fucking woman. That's not happening anymore." Now I was scared. I had never seen him as a threatening individual before, just a sort of goofy, cartoon-like character. Now, you might be thinking I led him on, but that's not the case at all. He had been a friend for years, was even at my wedding, and was fully aware I had no feelings for him. But now I was genuinely afraid of him. I asked him to leave. He was no longer welcome. He refused, though. He said by law he was required at least 30 days' notice to be evicted. When I spoke with police, they understood my situation, but explained that he'd either have to be officially evicted or I'd have to get a restraining order. I filed for the order, which they immediately granted me. But of course, it's just a piece of paper, so he chose to ignore it. Once he left my home, I locked all my doors and windows. When he returned, I showed him the order, to which he replied, "You stupid cunt, I'm not leaving." I tried to call the police every time he showed up, but every time by the time they'd get there, he was long gone. There would always be shoe prints on the door, cracks in the frame and the windows, and all the attempts he'd made to force them open. It never shut correctly after those attempts either. They were never able to officially serve him, because supposedly they couldn't even find him. I honestly believe, though, that they only tried once and then immediately gave up. I provided them with his plates, friends' addresses where he stayed, previous employment, everything they needed. It got to a point where I'd stay up late at night and hear his vehicle slowly driving by my home while he stared at me. Day and night, I'd be scared just looking through my window, always with my phone in my hand preparing. One time he even hid behind my front door and had a mutual friend knock, then jumped out and shoved the door open trying to enter. He even went as far as to message my young underage nephew who he'd only met one time on Facebook to try and gain sympathy and convince him to get me to change my mind, crossing even more obvious boundaries. It was a living nightmare. Eventually, though, he found a new obsession, and I was somewhat at peace. Several months later, he was caught on our local news for attempting to slit his ex-girlfriend's throat and beating her severely until she was unconscious, until a neighbor rushed over and he fled. All I could think about was how that very well could have been me. Apparently, free housing, food, cigarettes, and everything except a romantic relationship was just never going to be enough. He felt he deserved a casual sexual relationship as well. This happened about 4 years ago. I had just graduated from high school and was a month and a half into summer break. Needing money for college, I began working full-time for the school district I had just graduated from. Due to a music festival I wanted to attend, as well as monetary concerns, I did not go with my family to North Carolina. That was fine by me. What 18-year-old doesn't want the house to themselves for a week? Furthermore, my parents' house is out in the country, so I had little to no fear about my neighbors complaining about parties or being bothered in any way whatsoever. But I was very wrong. I often take the back roads home from my friend's house, but on this particular night I decided I wanted some McDonald's, so I took the main drag and came home on a different route. This way takes you past a mechanic shop not a mile away from our cul-de-sac. It was between midnight and 1 a.m., and as I passed by the mechanic shop, I noticed a car's lights turning on. Or should I say light, for I noticed that this car only had one headlight working. I remember thinking it was quite strange that this car all of a sudden turned on its lights just as I was passing. I began to become even more concerned when it suddenly pulled out behind me. I tend to be paranoid by nature though. Nothing serious, but I always have that question, like if the person behind me is following me, whether they mean me harm. I brushed this off as an unfortunate coincidence, but as I neared my street, I noticed the car was still tailing me, and I started to become a bit freaked out. I looked down at my gas tank, and my heart sunk as I saw it was on E. Either I pull on my street and go home, or I risk driving around and seeing if this dude follows me. Yet because of my lack of preparation, that option held the risk of my car running out of gas and leaving me stranded in the middle of a nowhere road. I figured I'd rather take my chances on my own soil than on the side of some dark, lonely country back road. I turned down onto my street, only to have my heart sink when the one headlamped car made the turn right behind me. At this point, I knew I was screwed. With nothing left to do, I began pulling up into my driveway, a hill about 100 yards long. To my utter horror, they began to follow me up the driveway. Looking back, I probably should have called the cops, but there's no love lost between law enforcement and myself. At the time, I was too caught up in the situation to even consider calling them. If my family would have been home, this never would have happened. I could have just called my dad and he would have grabbed his gun. But he, along with the rest of my family, were gone. 12 hours away at the beach. So when they began to drive up my driveway after me, I stopped and slammed my car in reverse. They responded by reversing as well, yet they stopped at the bottom of the hill, effectively completely blocking my driveway. At this point, I pulled forward again, only to have the same jig and dance repeat. They followed, I reversed, they reversed and sat at the end, blocking off my only escape. I quickly pulled up and turned my car around to come at them head on. By this time, they were halfway up my driveway, the furthest they had ever come up. Looking back, I was terrified, alone and angry. Who the hell did this person think they were? With my brights on and shining right into their face, I opened up my car door and got out. I pulled out my pocket knife and grasped it in my left hand, while I grabbed my hammer in my right. I used to keep one in between my seat and door just in case for emergencies. In some weird, desperate mindset, I made a split-second decision to grab the hammer by the head with the middle handle sticking out. My hope was that it would be mistaken for a gun. I began yelling and pointing my hammer/fake gun at the car, screaming at them to get the fuck out, and what do you want, motherfucker? The whole time I held my hammer like a gun and prayed they would fall for it. Whether they did or not, I cannot say. Part of me believes they thought it was a gun due to my brights being behind me, making my whole front side a silhouette. Yet they could have just not wanted to fight, I guess. Perhaps they thought I was a girl or timid and wouldn't react so aggressively and violently. Who knows? But it worked. They slowly backed out of my driveway and crept around the cul-de-sac. As they were leaving my street, I ran after them, hiding behind my neighbors' houses, and at every driveway the car would slow down to a near stop, as if scoping out the rest of the houses. Thankfully, I didn't notice them pull into any driveways though, and they turned off my street altogether. After I was safely in my house, I ate my McDonald's by the front window with all the lights turned off, waiting to see if they'd come creeping back. Thankfully, they didn't, but that night I locked every door in the house, which I always did anyways. I also, though, slept with a hammer, a machete, and a baseball bat next to me, and my pocket knife under the pillow, just in case. A complete overkill, I know, but what can I say? I was terrified. Now, though, I know where my dad keeps his gun, so if anything like this ever happens again, I guess I'll be better prepared. When I was 15, I enrolled in a program that allowed high schoolers to take classes at the local community college. Credits earned there would apply as both high school and college credits. My first semester as part of this program, I took a basic English/creative writing type class. I was by far the youngest student there. My classmates found out pretty quickly that I was a minor and were curious why and how I was attending college classes while still in high school. I explained the situation to them. They were all actually very nice and accommodating toward me, and I ended up exchanging IM screen names with quite a few of them. One of the classmates to whom I gave my IM info was a 19-year-old named Nick. He was a bit of an odd duck, short and chubby with a sparse beard, frequently wore a black cape lined with red on the inside to class. He seemed the type to be into darker stuff, was a huge fan of vampires and Satanism, and listened to some pretty intense music. I didn't really mind at the time. I was mostly just relieved I had made some new friends despite my young age. He began to instant message me on a pretty regular basis quickly though. The classroom we were in had computers for each of us, so Nick would often message me during class on those computers. At first, things seemed quite normal. We'd talk about our interests, our hobbies, family, homework assignments, gossip about other classmates even. Pretty soon though, Nick started bringing up some awkward topics that, as a naive 15-year-old girl, well, they made me pretty uncomfortable. Nick talked about how pretty he thought I was and would often tell me I looked a few years older than I was. To be fair, I was quite tall for a 15-year-old girl. He even said I acted mature for my age. He asked if I had a boyfriend, and when I told him I did, he seemed very upset and disappointed. He told me that if I broke up with my boyfriend and dated him instead, he could treat me like his vampire princess. He told me he wanted to kiss and touch me everywhere, and that he hoped I would let him bite my neck. I politely yet firmly turned him down every time he brought it up, but he never seemed to get the hint. Since I was too young for a driver's license, though, my mom had to pick me up at the college campus and drive me home every time. Due to her schedule, I usually had to wait for her to pick me up outside the building my class was held in. Most of the time, I would have to wait about half an hour. Nick started following me out of class and would often wait with me until my mom pulled up. He would pressure me during that time for more personal info and trash talk my current boyfriend. When my mom would finally pull up, I'd just breathe a sigh of relief and jump in the car. Online as well, Nick began to get more aggressive. Anytime he messaged me, he would start talking about my body in really inappropriate ways for a 15-year-old. I would repeatedly tell him I didn't like what he was saying, but no matter how hard I tried to steer the conversation away, he would always bring it back to dirty talk. He told me he didn't mind that I was mostly flat-chested, stating that he didn't need more than a handful. He told me I should wear tighter clothing in class so he could better imagine what I looked like naked. He even mentioned that he frequently fantasized about doing stuff to me while in class, and specifically mentioned bending me over the computer desks. When I was at home, I would refuse to respond to his messages if he took it too far. But when we were in class, I really couldn't make any excuses as to why I wasn't responding back. He would sit next to me in class every day and would send me messages, then stare at me until I replied. If I didn't, he would get very upset, and his messages would become more hostile. Things like, "Why aren't you responding to me? You know I can see you ignoring me. I thought you were too young and pure to turn into one of those bitchy sluts, but I guess I was wrong." I would often cave in and just say, "Sorry, I was paying attention to the teacher, didn't see him." Of course, he'd immediately change his tune, then start right back up with his twisted idea of a romantic conversation. I felt like there was no escaping his barrage of sexual commentary. I vowed to just stick it out and make it to the end of the semester at least. I thought that if I at least got through the class, I could easily avoid him on campus in the spring. Everything came to a head toward the end of the fall semester. Nick began to sit next to me in every class, messaged me constantly, calling me weird pet names in front of other people, and would always try to be in physical contact with me. He'd put his arms around my shoulders and always hug me. It made me excruciatingly uncomfortable, but I was too shy and nervous of what he would do to ask him to stop. I would shrug him off and try to stick to high fives only. I even told one of the mentors at my youth group that there was someone at my college making me feel uncomfortable. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, so I asked my youth leader if I could forward him parts of our online conversations that I thought were most inappropriate. Well, my youth leader's reaction quickly made me realize this was quite serious. He explained that what Nick was doing was both extremely inappropriate and also pretty much illegal. He asked me to keep him updated on the situation and send him any more questionable messages that came. A couple days later, Nick messaged me again. For some reason, on that particular day, he was acting particularly forward. He made several of the usual comments about my looks and body, then started to say how frustrating it was that I was so hot at such a young age. He told me I was too beautiful, and it drove him crazy seeing me in person. Then he said something that sent chills down my spine. "You're so sexy and gorgeous that I'd probably fuck you still even if you were dead." He then went on to describe in great detail about how he had this fantasy of having sex with me when I was freshly dead, and I mean in great detail. I was absolutely horrified. I just sat there staring at the barrage of messages as they popped up one by one. After a few minutes, I was able to snap myself out of my terrified stupor, and I immediately blocked him. I forwarded the messages to my youth leader, who became extremely incensed. He urged me to tell my parents or the campus police so that they could at least keep him away from me. He told me this could be considered a threat, and he wanted me to be safe. He seemed so afraid for me that it actually scared me even more. I told him I would think about telling someone. Then I signed off IM. Unfortunately, I was young and stupid, and did none of the things he suggested. Instead, I just finished the semester and tried to avoid Nick like the plague. No small task, let me tell you. I begged my mom to show up early so I could leave class and jump right in the car. The very first time I did so, she looked behind me and said, "Oh hey, that's your little friend." I turned to see Nick standing outside the classroom building, wearing his black cape and staring intensely at me. The look on his face was one of cold, furious hatred. I ducked and shouted, "Please just drive, Mom." My mother looked at me concerned, then slammed the pedal to the floor. I did eventually give my mom a shortened explanation of what had happened, leaving out some of the more grotesque details. After that, she made a point to show up before my class ended every day, and waited right outside the building so I could run out and hop in the passenger side of her car. Fortunately though, after he followed me outside a few more times, he seemed to get the hint and give up. He didn't try to talk to me in class anymore and didn't follow me around everywhere anymore. I did catch him staring at me in class, but in general, he seemed to back off a bit. After that class ended, I never saw or heard from him again, and for that, I'm truly grateful. I was young, maybe 12 to 14 years old at the time this happened. I had several friends who lived in the neighborhood behind mine. I was a latchkey kid, so I would often walk there by myself and walk home by myself. The whole walk maybe being 10 minutes or so. One day I was walking to a particular friend's house to spend the night, so I had my backpack with me. I had just made it past the clearing of the small wooded path I take from my neighborhood to hers, when I noticed this large white van, the kind stranger danger stereotypically warns you about. When I walked by it, I noticed two men were driving. Something about their faces made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. I continued walking, trying to glance every now and again to see if the van had started moving. Much to my dismay, it did. It was very slow. This was a residential area after all. Immediately I started running. I turned a corner quick and luckily made it to my friend's house, losing them at the last minute. I was huffing and puffing as a child with asthma. My friend's dad asked what had happened and went outside to see that the van was now obviously long gone. He told me I watched too many horror movies and I was probably overreacting. Well, a couple days later, I was yet again going to sleep at this friend's house, so I had my backpack again. This was in the early 2000s, so I didn't have a cell phone yet. I cleared the same path and noticed the same men in the same van. Immediately, they locked eyes with me. I pretty quickly realized I was now in danger if they had any ill intent. They'd seen me. They knew which street I was walking to. They were close enough to me that if I turned around, I'm confident they would catch me on foot. I booked it. I've never run my little asthmatic ass so fast before. To my horror though, the van immediately accelerated and began following me up until I reached that street. At this point, the man in the passenger seat flung the door open and started chasing me on foot. He was overweight though, so I knew my best chance was outrunning him. I threw my backpack at him, hoping it would either hit or trip him. Luckily, he did stumble over it, long enough to at least stall him a bit. I made it to my friend's house, and her dad called the police. They retrieved my backpack when they got there, but the men were long gone, and unfortunately, in my panic, I did not catch a license plate. I didn't see them or hear anything about it again until a few weeks later when we received a letter in the mail from the town police department alerting my parents that one of the registered sex offenders who had moved in years ago was arrested again for attempting to kidnap another child on that same street. He had been the one driving. The second man was a new accomplice of his. They had attached a photo of both men, and even their eyes on paper made my blood run cold. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button, and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.